Let's see where we left off. Our dear protagonist, an American woman in India for a conference, has discovered from her associate Pepe that the young girls that Pepe was fostering had been kidnapped. And our protagonist had promised that she would go and find them at whatever the cost. I sprinted across the yard. The familiar stench of urine and feces, tinged with a hint of sickening sweet rose attar, wafted in from the communal toilets of the camp across the road. I took a deep breath. The sweet smell of home, I thought. This was my world, my reality, with its flaws, inconsistencies, and sorrows, but mine alone, the one I choose to live in, the bare ground where nothing grew, the overall sense of abandonment. For over a century, the convent of the Sisters of the Poor had stood in serene isolation in the midst of mangrove forests, serving as a hospice for terminally ill nuns. In a shockingly short time, a few years, this lush landscape had turned into an arid desert. First, well-meaning government programs financed the clearing of the mangroves to make way for cash crops of rice and palm oil. These interventions were abysmal failures that left the land barren of nutrients, unable to support any form of vegetation. The final blow was the arrival of a multinational with plans to build a bottling plant for their sodas. Holding out the promise of well-paying factory jobs, the company was allowed to tap into the aquifers for pure clean water, fundamental to the manufacture of their fizzy drinks. When the aquifers dried up, the company closed the plant and moved on. The Vatican chose that moment to issue an edict to shut the convent down on the grounds that it appeared to be a luxury. But that was also the moment when the first broken and bloodied people from Sri Lanka began to arrive. At first, the conflict on the island was considered a minor skirmish that was expected to be resolved when both sides came to some agreement. But soon the skirmish expanded into a full-fledged civil war, with each side armed with an impressive array of sophisticated weapons. Fierce battles ensued, and very soon boatloads of panicked people reached these shores. They made do with blankets on bare ground in the expectation that they would be returning to their island paradise soon. Then, makeshift tents cropped up. Inevitably, international aid agencies declared this a humanitarian crisis and showed up with their ideas, programs, and money. A tract of land inland, adjacent to the convent, was secured and the refugees relocated. As the war dragged on, tents gave way to masonry structures. Soon, there were cafes, markets, a school, and several cinemas. It was a busy place that extended in all directions. This turn of events was a godsend for the Vatican, giving it the scope it needed to expand the boundaries of Christendom in a country stubbornly resistant to its message of peace and love. Mother Gabriel, the CEO of a large hospital in County Cork, was recruited and dispatched to join the great refugee game, her mission to save souls, not lives. Her first order of business was to transfer the dying nuns to some outpost. Then she anointed poor village girls with no dowry or marriage prospects as novices. Finally, she hired Pepe and I to raise funds and efficiently manage the acquisition and distribution of food and medicine. At night, she drew up plans for a new clinic, church, and school. The game was on. It was morning assembly, and the good mother was on the veranda, pacing, lecturing, and wagging a finger at the trusting, upturned faces of the novices seated in 2 neat rows on the floor. She was a tall Irish woman, at least 6 feet in her socks, with a pallid complexion and a steely blue eyes behind rimmed glasses. She paid no attention to encyclicals from Rome that allowed normal dress, but wore a most severe, thick, possibly flannel, black habit, with a starched, startlingly white, frilled structure that encircled her broad, plain face. "We must embrace suffering," she exhorted. "We must run toward it. Jesus died for us, and we, the guilty, must pay our debt. His suffering is our suffering. We must run toward it. Do you understand?" The novices nodded solemnly. At my approach, she gravely cast her gaze on me. "You are back," she said. "Go into my office, please." Her office was spacious but spare. Its only incongruity, a new oversized desk stained with a dark brown and strategically placed in front of a bank of windows. This way, while she was bathed in shadow, her visitors, seated on low, hard chairs opposite her, squinted and squirmed against the glare. Drawings for the new clinic, the first phase of the development, were spread across her desk. When she came in, I handed her the conch shell I had purchased in Rameshwaram, wrapped in newspaper and tied with string. She placed it at a far corner of her desk. "It's a conch shell," I said. "The place is famous for them." I had been allowed to attend the conference at some expense so that I could network with foreign corporations saddled with large amounts of cash. But I had returned early and with nothing to show for it. The only contact I made was with Sid, and he did not fit the corporate profile we were pursuing. I took my seat, twisting around slightly to check on my map pinned to a corkboard of the wretched settlement across the street. The mapping of the refugee camp that Pepe and I updated every week was my brainchild, designed to target deliveries of supplies more efficiently in a constantly evolving environment. "Glad to see Pepe has updated the map," I said. "About the children." "Oh yes," she said. "I've heard from the police. They are safely home. Now tell me." "Home?" I exclaimed. "They can't go back there. Home was where they were tortured and abandoned by their families. Pepe found them and took care of them. He was protecting them. Some men came and beat him. His bruises..." She slapped a large fleshy palm on the desk. "Inspector Chetty and 2 policemen were here to arrest Pepe for kidnapping," she said angrily. "He would be in jail if it were not for me. We should have never taken them in. They are not refugees. We cannot afford bad publicity just when we are beginning to make progress. If these people even imagine that we take away their children, we have come to a deep, dark, primitive place to spread the light of Jesus, and..." "This is not a primitive place," I cried out. "This is a 10,000-year-old civilization. That village headman, Raja, is just a very bad man and an ordinary criminal. He is the one who had to be paid off before he would allow us to vaccinate his own people during the cholera epidemic. He's the one who sold their precious aquifers to that bottling company and pocketed the money." Even as I spoke, I knew the situation was hopeless. She was right. The girls could not be removed from their village no matter the circumstances, and especially not by Christians and foreigners. The village headman could rally a mob in minutes to burn down the convent on the merest hint that the nuns were forcing the girls to eat beef, for example. Pontius Pilate had spoken, but she was not done. "You returned early," she said. "Did Pepe ask you to come back?" "No, he didn't." I passed on an exaggerated smile. "I did connect with a number of corporate sponsors, but..." I was about to plead illness to explain my early return when the phone rang. She picked up the receiver, listened for a minute, then turned to me, her pale face flushed with excitement. "There's been an explosion," she said. "All hands on deck." She returned to the phone. "Father Joseph, we will send our dear young novices at once to take care of the wounded." She was in her element, and I let myself out. I ran toward the warehouse, but stopped short at the sepulchral. Oh my goodness, this is one of those words I have a challenge with. Sepulchral chapel, a dingy one-room dilapidated structure adjacent to the convent cemetery that was soon to be demolished to make way for a magnificent light-filled cathedral that would rival San Thome in Chennai. I stepped in expecting to be alone. I needed to compose myself before I could face Pepe. In the first pew, I could just make out one of the novices hunched over and weeping convulsively. Perhaps someone close had died. Perhaps she was just lonely. I took a seat at the rear and stared up at the faded mural of a sorrowful crucified Christ, the crown of thorns, the bleeding wounds. "Oh, most merciful Christ," I murmured, "please make light of that young woman's burden." After a few minutes, I slipped out and shut the door quietly behind me. And we'll pause our reading of Moksha, liberation, there for now. So thank you for listening. Sounds like, as we continue the beginning, the rising action is definitely on its way. The poor girls have been returned, quote-unquote, home, back to their abusers, and suddenly there had been an explosion somewhere, and now someone in the chapel, full of tears. Oh dear. Not a positive ending point, but we have only just begun the story, and I have faith that it will continue to expand and contract, just as our breath may vary from rapid and shallow to smooth and deep, and eventually find equilibrium. Thank you for listening. I look forward to continuing reading this with you next time. Namaste.